our review.
A murder suspect, starting Monday. The Trial. See it first on NBC 26 and see it live on NBC26.com. NBC 26, leading the way on the Stephen Avery trial, starting Monday on NBC 26. See for yourself.
The Stephen Avery trial. Attorneys questioning potential jurors who could hear testimony in the Stephen Avery murder case.
Tonight, more than 3 dozen candidates are struck from the jury pool. NBC 26 reporter Jesse Wells has more from Manitowoc.
On his way out of court, I asked Stephen Avery if he thought he could get a fair trial.
I don't know yet.
Our cameras can't show it, but all day long, attorneys for both sides question jurors one at a time. Their goal, finding the first 30 people who don't have an obvious bias. From there, the prosecution and defense can strike 7 people each for any reason they choose, leaving 16 jurors to hear all the evidence in the case. NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Burke says while it is very unlikely, it is possible there won't be enough potential jurors on call that haven't been biased by the media coverage of the case, but he says the trial wouldn't end there.
I'm not sure you can ever get a perfect jury from whatever standpoint you're on, but at least you hope to get a jury that, even if they have some preconceived ideas, are at least open-minded enough to listen to the evidence and decide the case based on the evidence, not on their own personal bias.
In court, most of the individual questions focused on how much the potential jurors knew about Brendan Dassey, Avery's nephew, co-defendant, and possible witness at trial. Prosecutors also asked potential jurors to rate how much they trust Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies, a key question. Because Avery's attorneys will argue at trial, Manitowoc County officers planted evidence during their search of Avery's salvage lot.
And stay tuned to NBC 26 for updates every day during a trial, or visit our website, that's NBC26.com. Once testimony begins, you'll be able to watch it live on the web. We'll have reports from Jesse Wells again throughout the week. The Stephen Avery trial, a controversial recreation of Teresa Halbach's death.
The prosecution wants to show it to the jury.
But before opening statements, the judge has to make the very important ruling. Jesse Wells begins our live team coverage. He's outside the Manitowoc County Courthouse.
The focus of tomorrow afternoon's motions hearing will be a controversial computer animation. Prosecutors hope to use that video to assist in their opening statements. Avery's attorneys object. Now it'll be up to the judge to decide. Most of us have probably seen these flyovers of the Avery salvage lot taken in November of 2005. A burn barrel taped off in front of Stephen Avery's trailer. Because the jury won't actually get to tour Avery's property, prosecutors want to show them this computer animation illustrating the exact location of that burn barrel. The animation also shows the inside of Stephen Avery's trailer, where prosecutors claim Teresa Halbach was killed and where critical evidence, including a key to Halbach's SUV, was supposedly found. Avery's defense team has asked the judge not to allow that animation into evidence because they say it's not 100% faithful to real life, something they think could potentially bias the jury.
You know, are these really accurate, complete, and fair depictions?
The animation also illustrates a human skeleton which appears to have suffered head injuries, as well as where Avery's trailer is in relation to Brendan Dassey's home, where another burn barrel sits just outside. Prosecutors say the animation simply provides jurors a way to visualize the crime scene, which this news footage is simply unable to do.
Well, really to provide a context in which to evaluate the testimony, to evaluate the evidence which is presented, to help them better understand things. That's the idea behind it.
Now, finally, unlike jury selection the past 4 days, tomorrow afternoon's motions hearing will be open, so our cameras can show you exactly what happens after that. Opening statements in the case are set to get underway on Monday in Calumet County. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Manitowoc.
Thanks, Jesse.
Jury selection complete in the Stephen Avery trial.
8 men and 8 women will hear the case. Aaron Keller begins our live team coverage with more on who these people are.
The process of narrowing down this group of jurors took nearly a week. Tonight, a look at the final 16 who will decide Avery's fate.
In a trial the whole state is watching, the eyes of 16 people are most important, the people who serve on the jury. Every juror in the pool faced tough questions from Avery's attorneys.
They were very thorough. They asked very appropriate questions.
This woman was called for service but didn't make the final cut.
14 people got kicked off the jury pool today. Many of them already have strong opinions about Stephen Avery's guilt.
The prosecution moved to strike this juror, raising cries of racism from Stephen Avery's attorneys. The judge ruled the strike was valid. The final jury is made up of people who are mostly older than 40. 6 work blue-collar jobs, things like construction and general labor. 4 are retired. 1 is a farmer. 1 is even a musician. All must erase any opinions they've already formed about the case and give Avery a fair shot.
Are you nervous?
If convicted on murder charges, Avery could face life in prison.
Opening arguments begin on Monday in Chilton. The jury won't be sequestered. Something both sides have agreed with. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live at 6.
16 people are going to hear the case. Only 12 will deliberate.
The choice doesn't come until the very end of testimony. That's when 4 alternates are chosen by random.
Some other states, like I believe in the O.J. Simpson case, the jurors knew who were the alternates and who were the real jurors. In Wisconsin, you don't know until the end when the alternates are removed from the jury.
Until then, all 16 people must listen carefully and pay close attention, knowing they could be on the final 12.
Well, now that the jury is seated, the trial is scheduled to begin today. One final motion hearing, though, about a very controversial animation that gives the jury a virtual tour of the crime scene. Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage. He's in Chilton.
Well, prosecutors in the case get to use some of the video images they wanted to, but not all of them at this point. Now, prosecutors say because the jury won't actually get a first-hand tour of Avery's property, the computer animation would have simply helped them to visualize the crime scene, but Avery's defense says that video was distorting reality.
From the yard outside Stephen Avery's trailer to the inside of his home, and an overview of his garage. Just some of the images that make up this computer animation of Avery's property. State Trooper Tim Austin, an expert in scene reconstruction, says the video will help jurors visualize the crime scene, a common technique.
We very commonly use two-dimensional diagrams such as this to help show the scene or show where objects are.
Avery's attorney, Dean Strang, says the computer animation is simply misleading. For example, Strang points out in this image of Avery's garage, the sun shadows don't reflect reality.
Should I be alarmed by a catastrophic change in the planet Earth's orbit and tilt that I've got a strong sun shining out of the northwest?
I turned the sun on in this particular case to show, again, the software's capabilities.
The defense did drop its objection to the use of this diagram illustrating a human skeleton which appears to have head injuries consistent with the death of Teresa Hallbuck.
Now, finally, Judge Willis has not ruled yet whether that entire video will be able to be shown at trial. He says he'll address some of the concerns as they arise during trial. Today's decision again clears the way for opening statements to get underway on Monday. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thank you, Jesse. NBC 26 is staying on this story. We'll have live updates every day throughout the trial. If you want to watch the testimony as it happens, go to NBC26.com and click on the Stephen Avery trial.
Final act.
The Stephen Avery trial. Witness testimony begins today in the murder of Teresa Hallbuck.
Both sides present their case.
To assign responsibility for the murder and the mutilation of an innocent 25-year-old young lady.
We're going to ask you to send him home. We're going to ask you to send him home again.
We have live team coverage with the latest on the case. A special edition of NBC 26, live at 6, starts now.
And today's hearings just wrapped up about an hour ago.
It was a difficult day in court for the families. NBC 26 reporter Aaron Keller begins our live team coverage outside the Calumet County Courthouse.
You're talking to me.
Bob and Stacy, both sides in this case just wrapped up a press conference about an hour ago from right now. Ken Kratz, Mike Hallbuck, and Dean Strang, Stephen Avery's attorney, all speaking about some of what happened in court today, explaining some of the decisions that were also made.
In court, both the Avery and Hallbuck families sat with tears in their eyes. Mike Hallbuck was the first one to testify in this trial.
Contrary to popular belief, the hardest part wasn't seeing pictures of remains. It was seeing a picture of my sister smiling in court.
After court, Ken Kratz said he was not concerned about the conduct of any law enforcement officers. He also said his opening statement was a soft approach.
I have done my very best throughout this case to and not overstate what the evidence was going to be.
Avery's attorneys spoke of the state's request to pull Brendan Dassey's name from the case against Avery.
The state has backed away from Brendan Dassey and opened this up to another, which I suppose could be any one of 5 billion people on the planet.
And it was a very emotional day in court for both families. Teresa Hallbuck's 2 brothers and sisters and parents, cousins and aunts and uncles were all here today. They had tears in their eyes throughout the proceedings in the courtroom here in Chilton today. Also, Stephen Avery's parents were there on his side. They both left with tears in their eyes. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Aaron. Now, the prosecution began with a detailed timeline blaming Stephen Avery for the murder of Teresa Hallbuck.
The defense, on the other hand, painted a much different picture. Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage from Chilton.
Female bones belonging to Teresa Hallbuck located in a burn pit outside Stephen Avery's trailer. Blood belonging to both Hallbuck and Avery found in Teresa's SUV. Ken Kratz says Avery is also found with a cut on his hand.
This cut was actively bleeding on the 31st of October, and I guess thankfully for the state.
One question Kratz told the jury he won't answer at trial.
We can't prove the why in a case like this. That's called motive.
Avery's attorney, Dean Strang, says the bone fragments were found in a couple of places and appear to have been moved.
Burnt human bone fragments also apparently are found in one of the burn barrels behind Barb Yonda's house.
Strang says investigators rushed to judgment about Avery's guilt.
The police didn't kill Teresa Hallbuck, obviously. They have that in common with Stephen Avery. But they wanted to believe he did.
Now, while prosecutors talked in court at length about blood evidence found inside Teresa Hallbuck's SUV, Strang told the jury that blood was planted from the blood vial that was found on storage at the Manitowoc County Courthouse. Strang says the setup is retaliation for Avery's $36 million wrongful conviction lawsuit against Manitowoc County. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thank you, Jesse. The first witness called to the stand today, the victim's brother, Mike Hallbuck. NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Burke says it's a strategy to present Teresa as more than just a victim.
If it's for sympathy or if it's just to relate her to the jury so the jury has a feeling of who she was as a person. And, you know, it's so easy in a criminal case to talk about a body or talk about someone in abstract terms.
Teresa's cousin and former boss also took the stand today following her brother, Mike Hallbuck. The defense is using Stephen Avery's past as a central part of its argument.
With the past conviction for rape proved to be false, they're trying to establish a pattern for the jury that Stephen Avery is being set up. In 1985, Stephen Avery is convicted for rape. He sits in jail for almost 20 years for a crime he did not commit. In 2003, DNA evidence exonerated Avery, and he's free from prison. Avery files a lawsuit for wrongful conviction, and 3 years later, in October of 2005, prosecutors say freelance photographer Teresa Hallbuck met with Stephen Avery at his salvage yard near Manitowoc. Several days later, Teresa's family reports her missing, and the search begins where Teresa was last seen, the Avery salvage yard.
She's a good person. We'd all like some answers, and I'm sure they'll come in due time.
Search crews find Teresa's SUV. Stephen Avery is charged with murder. Avery insists he's been set up by the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department.
They're trying to set me up, and Manitowoc County's good for that.
In March of 2006, Stephen Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey, is also charged in the rape and murder of Teresa Hallbuck. Police say he confessed to the crime. Tonight, both sides present their cases for a jury to decide. And Avery's past conviction, an important part of the defense's case. They are trying to prove law enforcement is making the same mistake twice.
Now, because of this case's popularity, staff at the courthouse are ready for a crowd. They have space for 200 people inside the courtroom. Extra security, extra parking, even a doorman is standing by to turn people away. Kyler Berge continues our live team coverage with that story from Chilton.
Well, Bob and Stacey, there's around 15 spaces reserved for the public in the courtroom, and that's about how many people stop to fill them. Staff here at the courthouse were expecting to have to turn away hundreds of spectators. Instead, we were talking to spectators all day. One got here at 7, one got here minutes before court began. Both got a front row seat for this real-life courtroom drama. Relatives of Stephen Avery and the Halbach family are guaranteed a seat in the courtroom, leaving just a half-dozen places for regular people. The Sheriff's Department and even the spectators themselves were expecting pretty stiff competition for those seats. That's not what happened. Did you think you'd be able to find a seat in there today?
I, quite frankly, did not.
Staff at the courthouse were expecting to have to turn away as many as 200 people. They had someone posted at the front door for that very purpose. But as the day wore on and only a handful of spectators showed up, you can see from the parking lot, they didn't need any of that. People in the courthouse seem to think online streaming video is taking the place of the in-person courtroom drama. But for some, there's no substitute for the real thing, seeing the Halbach family and Stephen Avery with their own eyes.
Whenever a piece of evidence would come in, that was pretty, was pretty intense, he would shake his head no.
And after hearing from both sides with their own ears,
I think there's going to be a battle.
They'll come back tomorrow. Despite the low turnout today, the Sheriff's Department tells me they have no plans to end their extra security here at this trial. Kyler Berge, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Kyler. Well, the jury in this case not allowed to watch any media reports about the trial.
But can they really avoid the saturated coverage? It's on TV, radio, and in the paper. NBC 26 reporter Michael Benner is live in our Fox Valley newsroom with the story.
Yes, Dassey, I talked with a local psychologist and a law professor who's been studying juries for 30 years. They both tell me avoiding media coverage will be difficult, but not impossible. News of Stephen Avery's murder trial is everywhere.
Breaking news, opening statements from...
It's even on the radio.
Outlined their cases during the first day of the Stephen.
And if jurors leave Manitowoc County, they'll see the case making front-page headlines in other area newspapers. According to a local psychologist, it's a lot for the jury to handle.
The judge could have chosen to have sequestered the jury. He didn't do that. I think that puts a lot of faith in these jurors.
But even so, how does a jury turn away from such a high-profile case?
Assistants at the court will take newspapers for the jurors. They will clip out the articles that are relevant to the case and then return them to the juries.
As for TV, Hans suggests jurors record their favorite nightly programs, not only avoiding break-ins like these, but also allowing them to remain objective at a very crucial time. Now, finally, Valerie Hans tells me by not sequestering the jury, Stephen Avery got a much more representative jury. However, on the downside, they run the risk of allowing that jury to see media coverage they shouldn't when they go home at night. Michael Benner, NBC 26, live in our Fox Valley newsroom.
One important piece of testimony the prosecution won't be allowed to mention: Brendan Dassey's confession. Police say Dassey, Avery's nephew, admitted to raping and murdering Teresa Halbach along with Stephen Avery at the salvage yard. Well, NBC 26 staying on this story. We'll have live updates every day throughout the trial. And if you want to watch testimony as it happens, you can go to NBC26.com and click on the Stephen Avery trial. Avery trial. Witness testimony against Avery in the murder of photographer Teresa Halbach.
He had wanted the photographer that had been out there before.
Detailing the final moments of Halbach's life.
And an exclusive interview with Stephen Avery's father.
And we're sick and tired of it.
Accusing police of framing his son.
You can see this is a setup. If you start from the beginning.
Alan Avery very upset tonight.
He is convinced the local sheriff's department planted evidence. Kyler Berge begins our live team coverage from Chilton with the story you'll see only on NBC 26.
Well, after months of keeping quiet, a very frustrated Alan Avery broke his silence today. He says he's seen his son, his family, and his business wrongfully blamed for murder. And today it all got to be too much for him. Alan Avery arrives for day 2 of his son's murder trial, convinced it's all been a setup.
But we're sick and tired of them saying that bones found on Avery's auto salvage. They found nothing on Avery's auto salvage. All they found is somebody put a car there on Avery's auto salvage. And we're sick and tired of it.
He blames the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, a county where Stephen Avery was wrongly convicted on rape charges in 1985.
You can see this is a setup if you start from the beginning. They plugged the highway off, the state highway. They kicked us out of our houses for 8 days so they could plant evidence and everything else.
As for Brendan Dassey's confession, Alan thinks it's a lie and says his own son is innocent.
This is not right. I think we should have our justice system a good going over. Thank you.
And now Alan Avery will sit in court for as long as it takes, watching what he calls a flawed system
decide his son's fate. Now, we tried to speak with other family members today. Interestingly enough, Alan and Dolores Avery were the only ones attending court. Now, just a few moments ago, I spoke with Mike Halbach about these latest allegations. He says he's heard it all before and is still confident the jury will make the right decision. Kyla Berge, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Kyla. Two families, two different stories. And today's testimony is some of the most emotional we've heard so far.
The last two witnesses called to the stand were volunteer searchers. Aaron Keller continues our live team coverage in Chilton.
We heard from Ryan Hilligus today. He is Teresa Halbach's former boyfriend, later her friend who organized a volunteer search for her rather in November of 2005. We also heard from the woman who found Teresa Halbach's car.
It's day 2 of one of the most watched trials in Wisconsin history. The Halbach family for the second day arrived together with friends and supporters. Stephen Avery's mother and father also came. Testimony this afternoon focused on the volunteer search of the Avery property and the discovery of Teresa Halbach's car.
I maybe even screamed. I shouldn't have, but I did. And I went running to the area where she was. I said, Nicole, you have to come and see this car. It must be her car.
We also saw new pictures of the car as searchers found it, and we heard the frantic 911 call to the sheriff.
I'm at Avery Salvage.
Okay.
It is all covered up.
It's all covered up? Sturm says she watched the car for close to half an hour until Manitowoc County officers arrived. One Manitowoc County deputy guarded the car, and Pam Sturm says she watched until Calumet County officers arrived.
Sturm says her daughter tried to actually open the door of Teresa's car, even though they were told not to. She says her daughter used a tissue, did not go inside. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thank you, Aaron. The big question for the jury to think about tonight, who was the last person to see Teresa Halbach alive? The prosecution is trying to prove it's Stephen Avery. Jesse Wells picks up our live team coverage from inside the Calumet County Courthouse.
Teresa Halbach made several appointments the day she disappeared. The last known appointment was with Stephen Avery. Today, 2 people among the last to see her alive took the stand as both sides debate where Teresa was last seen. Don Pliszka, a co-worker of Teresa Halbach's at Auto Trader magazine, testified just weeks before Halbach's death. Teresa supposedly said Stephen Avery creeped her out.
She had stated to me that he had come out in a towel.
He meaning whom?
Stephen Avery.
Had come out where?
She didn't specify. She just said he had come out in a towel. I just said, really? And then she said, yeah, and she laughed and just said kind of like, you know.
The defense called that irrelevant hearsay. The judge agreed, meaning that testimony won't go to the jury. Steve Schmitz and Jolene Zipperer told the jury Halbach came to their homes on Halloween of 2005 to take pictures of cars they wanted to sell.
Did you have any further discussion with her, or did you ever talk to this young lady again?
No, I did not.
Those records show Halbach's last known appointment was at the Avery salvage lot. While they don't have court records to prove it, the defense contends Teresa could have gone to an undocumented appointment doing what they call hustle shots, something not recorded in advance.
So you don't know whether or not Teresa had any hustle shots, privately arranged shots on October 31st, do you?
No, I do not.
Let's go from the
Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz countered.
The real bottom line is if Ms. Halbach was killed by Mr. Avery, she couldn't have done any hustle shots after that, could she?
Finally, appointment records also show that on the 31st, Avery called for Halbach using his sister's name, Barb Yonda. Prosecutors want the jury to believe that Avery tried to lure Halbach to the property under suspicious circumstances, false pretenses, intending perhaps to kill her when she got there. The defense, though, claims that Avery had used Yonda's name in the past for previous appointments, and nothing happened then. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
And as Jesse mentioned there, one piece of evidence not allowed in court today, statements made by Teresa to a co-worker.
That's right. The co-worker, as we heard earlier, said that Halbach was called Avery creepy during a previous meeting. Now, our legal analyst, Avi Burke, here at NBC 26, says he's really not surprised the judge won't allow that evidence.
Whatever Teresa may have told her in the past is not admissible evidence, and it's improper for the jury to consider that.
And the judge would only allow the testimony if Teresa Halbach could take the stand herself and confirm those statements. So, what do you think? Email us with your thoughts, questions, concerns about the Stephen Avery trial to the Stephen Avery trial at NBC26.com. Let us know where you're from, what you think. Now, today, the Stephen Avery trial. The judge denies a mistrial after shocking new testimony.
But he asked us if he wanted
he wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
Did this man's statements contaminate the jury?
There is no way to unwind this from the jury's mind. It has enormous unfair prejudicial impact.
The defense caught off guard today.
They claim they were ambushed by the controversial statements from Stephen Avery's nephew. NBC 26 reporter Jesse Wells begins our live team coverage in Chilton.
Now, the judge ruled that the trial will continue, but he is going to allow some leeway for the defense to respond to Bobby Dassey's statements. Now, Bobby Dassey is Brendan Dassey's older brother. Now, Bobby said on the stand under oath today that Avery asked him on November 3rd, before Halbach was officially reported missing, if he wanted to help him hide a body. Those damaging words could, in some sense, seal Stephen Avery's fate.
In just the third day of testimony, the trial against Stephen Avery is almost thrown out.
It sounded like he was joking, honestly. But he asked us if he wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
The older brother of Avery's co-defendant Brendan Dassey drops a bombshell in court that Avery actually asked him to dispose of a body on the Avery salvage lot.
This comes as an unfair surprise.
Such a surprise that Avery's defense team immediately called for a mistrial, saying the statement is actually from someone not scheduled to even testify. Dassey did overhear the conversation, but told the jury it happened a week earlier than previously documented.
There is no way to unwind this from the jury's mind. It has enormous unfair prejudicial impact.
A mistrial is reserved, as this court knows, in serious cases of prosecutorial misconduct or breach.
After considering the impact of Dassey's testimony, Judge Patrick Willis decided the trial will continue, but will also allow Avery's attorneys leeway in dealing with the statement that could help seal the case against Stephen Avery.
The court would be inclined to grant the defense an opportunity, first of all, to cross-examine the witness and attempt to attack the statement today if the defense wishes.
Judge Willis also told the court he may give special instructions to the jury, but said it's premature to say what those instructions could be.
Finally, in court, lead prosecutor Ken Kratz said that the mistrial was completely uncalled for, but afterwards he said he wasn't terribly surprised. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Now, just because the jury heard this shocking testimony, some would say, doesn't necessarily give the defense grounds for a mistrial. NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Berg says too much has gone into the case.
I'm not surprised that the judge did not grant the mistrial request. This judge would want to keep this jury if he can. It took a long time to get the jury, it took a long time to get where we are.
The defendant.
Prosecutor Ken Kratz says he's not surprised at the request. He thinks it could happen again later in the trial.
This testimony could seriously hurt the defense's case. One of Stephen Avery's close friends heard the comments today and spoke with us after court. Owen Jensen continues our live team coverage from our Green Bay newsroom.
Well, Debbie Klemp is a woman who's had a very close relationship with Stephen Avery over the last 15 months, visiting him in prison, writing him letters. She fully believes he's 100% innocent despite what may have been said today.
It sounded like he was joking, honestly, but he asked us if he wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
Those comments by Bobby Dassey on the witness stand certainly caught the courtroom off guard, including the defense, which asked for a mistrial. Debbie Klemp, sitting behind Avery, didn't expect to hear what she heard. We caught up with her as she left the courthouse.
Because I never heard of that until just today myself. I never had much time to think about it, but it was taken out of context, or it was just jokingly or something. But I don't think there was nothing to it, but in the courtroom it was something real serious, of course.
Now, Klemp says she'll stay by Avery's side, guilty or not, if he is convicted. She says she'll go to prison and visit him, but she really firmly believes that he did not kill Teresa Halbach. Owen Jensen, NBC 26, live in the Green Bay newsroom.
Thanks, Owen. Now, after court today, both sides warned everyone listening not to take this development too seriously.
Police records are providing conflicting evidence. So what does it mean for the case? NBC 26 reporter Aaron Keller continues our live team coverage. He's in Chilton.
Well, Bob and Stacy, there are questions over the context of that conversation between Bobby Dassey and Stephen Avery. Also questions over when that conversation happened. Neither side would say after court if this will lead to a major change in tactics.
In what's become a daily press conference after the day's testimony is complete, Dean Strang admitted how surprised he was to hear Bobby Dassey's words.
The date
that the witness gave was unexpected and raised other issues for the lawyers on both sides in the case.
Avery's attorneys will have to sort out the date the conversation happened, but even the special prosecutor was careful.
This was not and is not, at least from the state's perspective, a central part of this case at all.
Neither side would explain exactly why, citing evidence that's under seal.
Some joke that Mr. Avery may have made to his nephew when somebody else may have been present, I don't believe is going to decide this case one way or another.
Dean Strang would also not say whether he thought Bobby Dassey was lying to cover up for his brother.
I have no idea if he misspoke or not. You'd have to ask him.
I just talked to Stephen Avery's attorneys again a few minutes ago. They say they are talking to Bobby Dassey. They promised to straighten all of this out during cross-examination. We are expecting that to happen possibly as soon as tomorrow. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Now, the mistrial request definitely overshadowing Bobby Dassey's earlier testimony. He told the jury he saw Teresa Halbach taking pictures of the maroon van Avery had for sale. Later that morning, Dassey noticed Halbach's SUV outside, but Teresa was nowhere in sight.
Also testifying today, Nicole Sturm. She, along with her mother, found Teresa Halbach's SUV on the Avery salvage lot. Nicole tells the jury she never saw police enter Halbach's car. The statement could hurt the defense's main argument that police planted evidence.
So, what do you think? Email us with your thoughts, questions, concerns about the Stephen Avery trial to Stephen Avery trial at NBC26.com. And, of course,
Stephen Avery trial, the defense poking holes in controversial statements from Stephen Avery's nephew.
Bobby Dassey claiming his uncle asked him for help hiding a body. Today, the defense cross-examines Dassey.
And he admits he thought his uncle was joking about hiding a body.
What you caught was Steve making a joke about, want to help me get rid of a body or dispose of a body, something like that.
Yes.
That was clear to you it was a joke.
Yes.
Mike laughed.
Yes.
You laughed.
Yes.
Defense also read a police report detailing Dassey's entire day, hoping to put those comments into a better perspective. Now, testimony about Avery's joke overshadowed the real reason attorneys called Bobby Dassey to the stand.
Dassey is one of the last people to see Teresa Halbach alive. Testimony that could actually help the defense. Jesse Wells begins our live team coverage in Chilton.
Well, Bobby Dassey testified today that he saw Teresa Halbach arrive at Stephen Avery's trailer the day Halbach disappeared to take photographs of a minivan that Avery had for sale. The defense quickly called that story into question, pointing out it conflicts with things Bobby Dassey's own brothers have said.
Halloween 2005, Bobby Dassey lives in this trailer with his mom and two brothers. Next door is Stephen Avery's trailer. Bobby told the jury he clearly saw Teresa Halbach walk towards Avery's home that day.
You started taking a photograph or two of the van, right?
Yes.
And then you go hop in the shower.
Yes.
After getting cleaned up, Bobby says he left to go hunting. Halbach's SUV was still sitting outside, but Teresa was nowhere in sight. The defense says, though, that doesn't imply foul play.
I guess tell the jury, did you hear a lot of horrible screaming coming when you walked out with the bow?
No, I didn't hear anything.
Anybody crying for help?
No.
How long would it take to get into your car?
Maybe 10 seconds.
Okay. So in those 10 seconds, you didn't hear any screaming or any calls for help, is that right?
No.
The defense also says Bobby's testimony differs from a police report given by his brother Blaine, who said Bobby likely wasn't even awake when Teresa was at the property, nor had Bobby gone hunting that afternoon.
And if Blaine told the police that you were still sleeping at 3:40 or 3:45 when he got home from the school bus, and that you awoke after he got home, Blaine's just mistaken?
Yes.
Now, Bobby Dassey's claim that he didn't hear any screams coming from Avery's trailer may also conflict with Brendan Dassey's police confession. Brendan told police last March he heard loud screams coming from the trailer when he and his uncle allegedly raped and murdered Teresa Halbach. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Jesse. Well, two Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies also taking the stand. They're trying to disprove Avery's conspiracy theory. Defense insists Avery's blood was planted in Teresa Halbach's SUV. Today's testimony suggests no law enforcement entered Halbach's car.
Did you see any officer or any citizen, for that matter, either enter or in any way disturb that vehicle?
No, nobody disturbed that vehicle during that time.
Two deputies accused of planting that evidence. Herman testified today those two didn't go anywhere near Halbach's SUV.
So what do you think? Email us your thoughts, questions, or concerns about the Stephen Avery trial to the Stephen Avery trial at NBC26.com. Now, today's first question comes from Lynn in Two Rivers. Lynn asks, why doesn't Stephen Avery wear an orange jumpsuit when coming to court? NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Burke says the decision is up to the judge in each individual case.
A judge has the authority to allow a defendant to come into court dressed in regular clothes so that they're not singled out wearing an orange jumpsuit to make them look guilty before they've been convicted.
Avery isn't required to wear restraints either. The judge says he does not pose a threat. Well, a lot of you have also been writing about memorials in the courtroom.
Teresa's family and friends laying blankets over benches wearing her favorite color. Now, they call them gifts from friends, but are they influencing the jury? NBC 26 reporter Aaron Keller continues our live team coverage. He's in Chilton.
Well, Bob and Stacy, in this case, it's actually a very interesting story. Mike Halbach says the quilts were a gift from a woman who works in the special prosecutor's office. She works with a community organization that makes those quilts for local children, and those quilts will go to local children at the end of the case.
In a trial that will last a long 6 weeks, you may be seated. Any comfort from the hard wooden benches of the Calumet County Courthouse is a big help. The Halbach family brings these quilts.
They were made by a number of people for children, for youth, for the youth in the area.
But do they have an effect on the jury?
I don't think it's being viewed that way. It's not the same thing as a button.
Benches are wood, and we sit there for 8 hours. That's the reason they're there for us.
The judge's order for trial administration bans courtroom memorials. It reads, spectators will not be permitted to wear clothing expressing sympathy or support for either the defendant or the victim in the case. Persons wearing any such clothing, including visible armbands, emblems, or any other similar attire, will not be permitted in the courtroom. The judge's order does allow the Halbachs to wear blue wristbands with Teresa's name, but only if the jury can't see them.
The judge's order aims to keep the courtroom free of distraction, and so far neither side has said these quilts are a problem. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Well, NBC 26 staying on this story. Stephen Avery trial. The defense cross-examines a lead investigator tonight.
He's the man who sent officers to search the Avery family property. The defense claims there's evidence of a setup, but were the investigators just doing their job? NBC 26 reporter Aaron Keller live in Chilton tonight.
Well, Special Agent Tom Fossbender of the Wisconsin Department of Justice was the guy on the hot seat. His testimony lasted 4 hours today, and at times he had to defend his decision to send Manitowoc County deputies to search Stephen Avery's trailer.
The search of the Avery salvage yard in November 2005 lasted 8 days. Tom Fossbender was in charge of assigning deputies.
We had a huge scene here. And most officers don't have that level of expertise. And at a homicide scene, that is the level of expertise I want processing my evidence.
He allowed 2 Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department employees, James Lank and Andrew Colburn, to search Avery's trailer.
As you sit here today, as the lead investigator in the case, have any problems at all with Link or Colburn's involvement in this case?
Absolutely not.
Both men had just given depositions in Stephen Avery's civil suit for wrongful imprisonment.
Neither one of them told you that they had been witnesses in a civil lawsuit, did they?
That's correct.
And ironically, both found critical evidence, like this car key in Stephen Avery's trailer, a conflict of interest the defense is trying to exploit.
At times, today's testimony got very combative, both sides very eager to prove their point. We can expect much more of that as this trial moves into the weeks ahead. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Aaron. Lead prosecutor Ken Kratz and Avery's defense attorneys both say they think today's testimony helped their cases. Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage with both sides.
Well, Ken Kratz told us tonight that he thought that Agent Fossbender did a pretty good job holding up under some pretty intense, sometimes heated testimony. Fossbender made no apologies for having those 2 Manitowoc County officers take part in the investigation.
As I've told you, both attorneys, highly skilled. Mr. Buting, I think, did a very nice job in at least pointing out the inconsistencies or what their theory may be, but I also think that Special Agent Fossbender did a equally good job in explaining his role as lead investigator in the case.
At times, you know, you get answers that are waffling or not directly responding, and things can get a little bit tense between a hostile witness and the questioner.
Both sides also said tonight that while the first week of testimony was sometimes exciting and sometimes not, they're both confident the case so far is going in their favor. Of course, in the end, that'll be up to the jury to decide. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Now, early today, an expert in searches using cadaver dogs testifies that her canine alerted and found the blood in Teresa Hallbuck's SUV. Julie Kramer says the dog also searched the inside of Avery's trailer, alerting on one spot.
Within that building, we did get one trained alert in a bathroom area.
What the source, again, of the alert was, you're not able to say.
No.
The defense points out, despite the canine search of Avery's trailer, there has never been any blood, hair, or anything leaking Teresa Hallbuck to the inside of Avery's trailer.
So what do you think?
WFRV-TV. This is CBS 5 News Weekend with Chris Schuler, meteorologist Dave Miller, and sports with Bert Griffin. Now CBS 5 News Weekend, working for you.
Welcome back, everybody. Stephen Avery's murder trial started with opening statements in Calumet County this past Monday. Now, Avery and his nephew, Brendan Dassey, are accused of killing Teresa Hallbuck on Halloween of 2005. Avery had been wrongfully convicted of rape and spent 18 years in prison until DNA proved someone else committed that crime. He was arrested about 2 years later for Hallbuck's murder. Dassey is scheduled to be tried separately. Now, in this second half hour of CBS 5 News, we're going to take a look back at the first week of the Avery trial. Our legal analysts also are going to join us to weigh in on the key events in the trial so far. We begin with opening statements on Monday. The prosecution passionately proclaimed the evidence as a whole clearly showed that Stephen Avery is a killer.
You think of evidence as pieces in a jigsaw puzzle. You wouldn't tell if you were handed one piece of a jigsaw puzzle where that's going to go. But if you got the box, and if you have the box, some of the pieces are obvious where they go. Some are not so obvious, but at least it's a guide. It's a help for you as to where these pieces all fit. I'm only going to present those pieces of evidence that are necessary. Those pieces that are necessary to tell you the entire story. My job is not to present gruesome or overly graphic information for you. We're talking about a real person. We're talking about somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, a lot of people's friend. Teresa Hallbuck had her whole life in front of her.
I thought that he actually had some real powerful ideas, and he built up themes. He built up themes of Avery being in control of everything. Avery's dog there. Avery's controlling the scene. Avery's controlling the situation. I'm assuming he's doing this to combat the state's argument that this was all a setup and the state was in control of planting the evidence. He also came up with this theme of Teresa Hallbuck almost speaking to the jurors from the grave.
I thought the state did a good job in presenting the evidence, or what they expect the evidence will show. They basically gave the analogy of this being a jigsaw puzzle, explained that the evidence would come in very methodically, as the state normally does in its opening. They typically like to try to lay a roadmap for the jury so they know what to expect in terms of when witnesses will testify and what they're expected to say. And for the most part, the state has the evidence that they want to present. They know how they're going to present it, and they explain all that to the jury.
Now, after the prosecution and the defense got their chance, they countered that investigators planted blood to prove their own assumptions that Avery simply had to be a killer.
I think when you've heard it all, you'll conclude that it's at least most likely, more probable, that the bones were moved to Stephen Avery's burn area, not burned there and moved from that area. It was an immediate focus on this man. We're going to ask you to send him home. We're going to ask you to send him home again. We're going to ask you to get it right this time. We're going to ask you to set it right.
I thought Dean did a good job, but it was a different presentation. He started out, and I thought it was a little bit more scattered. It wasn't quite as organized. He didn't have the PowerPoint presentation that the state had. But then what I thought he did well at, is what I see from a lot of defense attorneys, when he really got to the meat, the heart of the matter, and there's a lot of evidence here that doesn't seem like it can be explained how this evidence came to be. He started, I thought, getting more emotional. His presentation got more powerful, and so he was able to really make a strong presentation to the jury.
I think Mr. String definitely picked up steam as the opening progressed. I think the strongest points were near the end, certainly pointing out some of the problems with planted evidence, or what they're going to argue is planted evidence, was the most compelling. I think some of the other stuff wasn't quite as interesting, but certainly I think the jurors were probably most interested in hearing about potentially planted evidence.
And by Monday afternoon, testimony then began. The first witness that Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz called was Teresa's brother, Mike, who talked about his relationship with his sister.
Every few days, I would probably talk to her either on the phone, or if it was a weekend, we'd probably see each other if I was at my parents' house. You know, she would stop over during the week or over the weekend. So I would see her or at least talk to her every 3 days or so.
I think that made sense to call him first, quite frankly. He just got done, the attorneys just got done doing their opening statements. Ken tried to really impress upon the jury that this is a human being who lost her life, and then he starts with one of his most powerful witnesses in terms of her life, not necessarily the evidence certainly, but that can describe Teresa and her life, and to really make the jury feel and understand that somebody lost their life here, and they have to remember that.
Come day 2 of this trial, emotional testimony came from Teresa Holbach's cousin, who found her RAV4 hidden in the Avery salvage yard. Now, the state played the call that Pam Sturm made to the Calumet County Sheriff's Department, stating that she had found the car and was looking for the vehicle ID number.
I'm on the search for Teresa Holbach, and we found a RAV4.
You did?
It's a bluish green, though. It's more blue than green. We just wanted to know if you got the VIN number for that vehicle.
Yes, we do. We do have a VIN number. Can we get the VIN number?
I can't find it on the...
Where is the vehicle at?
I'm at Avery Salvage.
Okay.
It is all covered up.
Can you see any other numbers?
Yeah. T0, Z, 5, X, 7, a 1 or a T, a 1 or a T.
Stay right where you are. Do not touch anything. Do not go anywhere around that vehicle.
A very powerful moment in court. Now, Sturm said she never took her eye off of Teresa Holbach's vehicle until it was taken into evidence by investigators. The defense challenges that claim, though, and says Avery's blood was planted in the RAV4 by 2 Manitowoc County deputies.
I thought it was powerful because it actually showed she's on the stand breaking down in tears, making this very real to the jury. And I thought it was actually very interesting and somewhat powerful that the sheriff, Sheriff Poggle, was actually sticking to procedure.
They get out those facts and how she went about this investigation and found the vehicle, and at the same time they're doing that, they're getting this emotional response, both listening to the phone call and at the same time seeing her on the stand breaking down in tears. So I think there's been that balance from a lot of the state's witnesses in terms of not just getting out the facts, but how they relate to Teresa, and I think that's pretty good.
And then we had day 3. The defense calls for a mistrial. We'll have more on the events of that day and testimony from the rest of the week in just a bit. Now back to our recap of week 1 of the Avery trial. On Wednesday, Stephen Avery's nephew, Bobby Dassey, took the stand. The prosecution says he was the last person to see Holbach alive on Halloween.
I've seen Teresa Holbach get out of the vehicle and started taking pictures. She started walking over to Stephen's trailer.
You could see that from your location?
Yeah, through the window, yeah.
When you walked out to your vehicle to go bow hunting, did you notice if that teal or blue SUV was still in the driveway?
Yes, it was.
Then the testimony that the defense said they never saw coming. Dassey said that Avery asked him to help get rid of a body.
Could you tell us what your Uncle Stephen told you that day?
Well, my buddy Mike was over too, and he asked us, it sounded like he was joking, honestly, but he asked us if he wanted us to help him get rid of the body.
Now, the date of this conversation conflicts with past police reports. That defense then called for a mistrial.
I can think of no remedy short of asking for a mistrial.
The defense had this information available to them, the context and the subject matter, and if the dates are wrong, there are many remedies available to the defense.
The request for a mistrial was denied, and on day 4, it was time for damage control for the defense. Avery's attorney, Dean Strang, cleared up the confusion over the dates on cross-examination. Now, the comment was made after Holbach's disappearance first aired on the news, not before.
You didn't catch the first part of the conversation, I gather.
No, I didn't.
So you don't personally know whether Mike started the conversation or Steve did?
No, I don't.
What you caught was Steve making a joke about, want to help me get rid of a body or dispose of bodies, something like that.
Yes.
That was clear to you it was a joke.
Yes.
I think I would score that point for the state. I think the fact is they've established that that conversation did happen, and that's essentially uncontroverted. And you have a situation where Mr. Avery is making this type of comment, or allegedly making this type of comment about disposing of a body after they have heard that she's missing, and she's missing, and the last place she was seen is your property. And just to make that type of comment in that type of situation, as I think Mike Holbach explained, at the end of the day is a sick joke.
The defense did a good job discrediting Bobby Dassey. The defense tried to play it up like a joke, and it was admitted that even Bobby said it was like a joke. But it's just not the type of thing that most reasonable people would joke about. So I think it's definitely another hurdle for the defense that they have to get over, and apparently it's a hurdle that they didn't think they would have to get over because of the timing.
And with just 1 day left in the first week of the trial, one of the lead investigators in Teresa Holbach's murder takes the witness stand. That's later on. Welcome back, everybody. The first week in the murder trial of Stephen Avery wrapped up after focusing on key evidence and exactly how it was collected. One of the lead investigators in the Teresa Holbach murder case defended his tactics on the stand Friday for nearly 5 hours. Special Agent Tom Fassbender says the Holbach case is the largest investigation he's ever been a part of, but Stephen Avery's attorneys believed it was flawed from the start. Now, on Halloween of 2005, Holbach went to Avery's property to take photos of a vehicle at Stephen Avery's request, but then turned up missing. After her SUV was found hidden on the Avery property, a cadaver dog then went in and smelled blood on the vehicle. Now, that changed the focus of the investigation and an extensive search of the Avery property that uncovered lots of evidence. But on cross-examination, the defense pointed out an immediate lack of blood evidence.
4 months of investigation had found not one shred of Teresa Holbach's DNA anywhere in Mr. Avery's trailer or garage. Isn't that right, sir?
Yes.
Now, the defense says some evidence was planted by 2 Manitowoc County deputies involved in that search who had been deposed earlier in Avery's $36 million federal lawsuit after his wrongful rape conviction. The defense said those deputies had plenty of time to plant Avery's blood in Teresa Holbach's SUV the day that it was found.
Did it cause you concern that for 4 hours, the major piece of evidence in this case was under the control and security of the one department that it had itself determined to have an appearance of a conflict of interest?
No, it didn't.
They have to make the argument to the jury that there was an opportunity for Link and Colburn to plant this evidence. And so far what they've shown is that Manitowoc County was in charge of this situation, not like the state said, that, you know, Avery's weren't in control of this scene. So I think this defense is already well on their way to establishing the fact that if you don't trust Manitowoc County, then you can't trust that it wasn't possible for them not to plant this bud.
You have to remember, all the defense is trying to do is plant enough doubt in these jurors' minds to get an acquittal for their client. I mean, for example, with a car, Of course, the officers are going to hold steadfast to their idea that nobody else was by the car, and there was no chance for anyone to plant any blood or any other evidence. But it did come out that somebody had looked in the car and they saw a piece of paper with Teresa's name on it when looking in the car, but when they looked in the car, they couldn't see any blood in the vehicle. And they explained that, the state, I think, explained that away by saying, well, you wouldn't necessarily be able to see any blood because of the dark interior of the car, but this stood out because it was a light piece of paper with dark writing. Well, that's enough. I mean, that type of evidence, at least it's something now the defense can hang its hat on.
Now, 2 people also testified yesterday on finding the license plates to a Holbox SUV in the Avery salvage yard. Volunteer searcher William Brandis said he found the plates in a station wagon on the north end of the yard in November of 2005. This was one of nearly 4,000 vehicles that authorities and volunteers searched that day. Wisconsin State Patrol Trooper Cindy Payne assisted in collecting the license plates. Brandis said the plates were mangled and crumpled. He said he had to unfold them to identify the number, which was SWH 582. And we have extended coverage of the Avery case on our website. If you have any questions for our reporters covering the trial, myself, Anjanette Levy, Tammy Elliott, just go to WFRV.com/Avery. Click on our courtroom journals. Got outside.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Aaron Davison has this night off. A forensics expert for the state testified in the Avery murder trial for much of this day. CBS 5's Chris Schuler has been following the trial for us. Joins us live now with the latest from the Calumet County Courthouse. Chris?
Well, Tom, John Ertl is a crime scene expert, but today the defense was wondering why this DNA analyst wasn't given more responsibility at this particular crime scene. John Ertl was brought to the Avery salvage yard to find evidence, but when the first search of Avery's trailer was made, co-lead investigator Tom Fossbender didn't invite him along.
And instead, Mr. Fossbender had you going around and taking photographs and looking through garbage.
This prosecution witness testified the first time he was in Avery's trailer was November 6, a full day after 2 Manitowoc County deputies, accused of a frame-up, conducted the very first search. Once inside, he found
some blood stains on both entry doors and on the floor, the vanity, and in the sink in the bathroom.
But no sign of an ignition key.
Did you see a Toyota key sitting on the floor in plain view?
No, I did not.
And no telltale sign of a violent killing.
And when you went to Mr. Avery's residence, you saw no such high-velocity spatter, right?
Correct.
But the prosecution pointed out Ertl found cell phone remains and bone fragments in burn barrels and a fire pit.
We collected a lot of material from that sifting.
And as for the lack of blood splatter, criminals often try to cover up their tracks.
So, in effect, then, it is possible to clean up a crime scene.
Well, most certainly.
And Tom Ertl also testified by the time he searched some of the areas on the Avery property, specifically the burn barrel and his burn pit. They'd already been altered unintentionally, though, by officers already working the scene.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton this evening. We continue with the story. Officers who found and collected key pieces of evidence also testified about their role in the search of the Avery property. CBS 5's Anjanette Levy now with that part of the story.
Well, Tom, Calumet County Sergeant Bill Tyson and members of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department searched Stephen Avery's property, and today they showed the jury what they found. The night the search of the Avery property started, Calumet Sergeant Bill Tyson knew it would take a while. Tyson and Manitowoc County officers Dave Remaker, Sergeant Andrew Colborn, and Lieutenant Jim Link searched Stephen Avery's trailer. The Manitowoc officers found handcuffs, leg irons, and blood stains. The defense has accused Colborn and Link of planting evidence, including Avery's blood.
At any time during the search of the residence on the 5th of November, did Lieutenant Link, Sergeant Colborn, or Detective Remaker ever take any items of property from that location?
No, they may have assisted.
In the following days, Tyson searched other areas with the Manitowoc County officers, including Barb Yonda's trailer and cars in the salvage yard.
By the way, the three of you didn't plant any blood while you were doing that, did you?
No.
2 days after the search started, Manitowoc County Sheriff's Deputy David Siders talked about what he found underneath a tire in Stephen Avery's burn barrel.
It appeared to be parts of a cell phone that were actually melted inside the burning barrel.
Dean Strang implied the phone could have been planted.
The cell phone parts you saw were lying on top
Correct.
of the other junk and ash.
Now, prosecutors say that cell phone found in the burn barrel belonged to Teresa Hallbuck. Meanwhile, Calumet County Sergeant Bill Tyson returns to the stand tomorrow morning for cross-examination.
Okay, thank you, Anjanette. Anjanette Levy live in Chilton this evening. Now, following today's testimony, one of the members of the prosecution team commented about what was said on the stand today. Special Prosecutor Tom Fallon said that questions over the role the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department played in the investigation are being cleared up.
I think it shows the overall involvement. Whether it's limited or not, that's up for the jury to decide, but I think the message is coming across clearly as to how the investigation was run.
And we have extended coverage of the Avery case on our website. To know more about the case, just go to wfrv.com/Avery. We also have courtroom journals from our reporters who are covering the trial. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Aaron Davison has this night off. The defense claims 2 Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies were out to get Stephen Avery by planting evidence aimed at sending him back to prison. Today, both were called to the witness stand. Chris Schuler standing by live now from the Calumet County Courthouse with the latest. Chris?
Hi, Tom. They are 2 officers with years of experience today. They say the claim by the defense that they planted evidence over a lawsuit filed by Avery for a wrongful rape conviction is ridiculous. With reputations at stake and allegations of planted evidence, Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz got right to the point.
Is that something that you've ever done in your law enforcement career?
No, sir. I've never planted any evidence at any time.
I have to say that this is the first time my integrity has ever been questioned.
Avery's attorneys claim Andrew Colborn and Jim Link planted Avery's blood in Teresa Hallbuck's SUV and the key for that vehicle in Avery's trailer. Colborn said that key was found after he moved a bookcase in Avery's bedroom during a 7th search.
Twisting it, shaking it, pulling it.
It fell to the ground and a Calumet County officer present took custody.
We turned the key over and I believe we were told that it would be going to Madison to the crime lab where Teresa's vehicle already was.
Link testified he never came close to Hallbuck's vehicle when it was found November 5th.
Did you have any contact with Teresa Hallbuck's SUV?
No, sir, I did not.
As for that lawsuit, Colburn said his involvement was giving a deposition about a phone call he took back while working as a jailer back in 1995. It came from another police agency about a possible suspect they had in custody who could be responsible for a crime committed in Manitowoc County. Colburn said that he passed that information on to detectives. Now, Link also told the jurors that he gave a deposition too, but only about the fact that Colburn had told him about that call. Now, both of these men told the jury today that that limited involvement did not make them band together to frame up Stephen Avery.
All right, thank you, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton this evening. Now, also on the stand today in the Stephen Avery trial, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department deputy who oversaw Manitowoc County officers. And for that part of the story, we're joined live now by CBS 5's Anjanette Levy. Anjanette?
Well, Tom, today the defense just hammered Calumet Sergeant Bill Tyson about the evidence found in Stephen Avery's trailer. Yesterday, Tyson said no one under his supervision planted Avery's blood, but today the defense tried to suggest that other evidence may have been. Calumet County Sergeant Bill Tyson said the lead investigators in the case, Special Agent Tom Fossbender and Investigator Mark Wiegert, told him to supervise 3 Manitowoc County Sheriff's officers as they searched Stephen Avery's trailer.
You were the watchdog here. You were the custodian, the representative of Calumet. You made sure that none of those officers could have planted anything, right?
I watched him to the best of my ability within those 3 hours.
Tyson watched as Manitowoc County Sergeant Andy Colborn, Lieutenant Jim Lank, and Detective Dave Remaker searched. All 4 are trained to collect evidence. Items found that night included handcuffs, leg irons, and guns. Jerome Buting honed in on what wasn't found that night.
You never saw a Toyota key anywhere in Mr. Avery's bedroom that night, did you?
I did not, no.
That key, which started Teresa Hallbuck's SUV, was found 3 days later in Avery's bedroom.
And would you agree with me that it would have been very difficult for Lieutenant Link or Sergeant Colburn to have planted a Toyota key in that residence under your watch?
I believe it would have been difficult.
Jerome Buting was suggesting that those officers would not have had the chance to plant the key that first night of the search, but may have been able to plant it 3 days later under a different Calumet officer's watch. Sergeant Colborn testified today that that key fell from a bookcase when he moved it, and testimony will continue tomorrow with the man who spotted that key, Manitowoc Lieutenant Jim Lank. Okay, thank you, Anjanette. Anjanette Levy live in Chilton this evening. After today's testimony, we heard reaction from the Halbach family spokesperson, Teresa's brother Mike, and he was encouraged by today's events in court.
We're doing well. I think we're doing even better after hearing the testimony today and the apparent lack of questioning regarding Sergeant Colborn. It was very surprising to hear very little in the cross-examination. As for the defense, they say the jury has heard plenty about the search of Avery's property, and certain events should be sticking in their minds.
The power of the jury seeing when that key finally supposedly appears in the sequence of events is much greater than any direct question a lawyer could ask.
CBS 5 legal analyst Jeff Oswald weighed in on today's testimony, and he says this was a day where the prosecution definitely hit a home run.
From a defense standpoint, quite frankly, it didn't pan out as I expected. Not that I necessarily expected a Perry Mason type moment, but I did think that the evidence maybe would have come in a little bit differently, or that there was not necessarily a smoking gun, but information that would have lent itself more strongly to the frame-up defense. I think it was a good day for the prosecution. I think they were able to, again, very methodically and carefully introduce the steps taken by their officers to do this investigation, to make sure that there was constant watching of each other.
New information in this Stephen Avery trial, a voice the jury hasn't heard before.
It's a telephone message, the voice of Teresa Halbach, a recording that could impact the jury. Aaron Keller begins our live team coverage with what this means for the case.
Well, the victim left that telephone message on Barb Yonda's answering machine. You'll recall Barb Yonda is Stephen Avery's sister. They live right next to each other on the very same property. Both sides in this case have an explanation as to what that message means.
This is Teresa with Auto Trader Magazine.
It was a voice that left a chill in the courtroom. A message left just hours before prosecutors say Teresa Halbach was murdered.
I'm a photographer, and I'm just giving a call to let you know that I could come out there today in the afternoon. It would probably be around 2 o'clock or even a little later.
The Halbach family sat quiet. On the left, Teresa's mother looked down as she heard some of her daughter's last words. Teresa Halbach left the message for Stephen Avery's sister, Barb Yonda. Avery was helping Yonda sell a red van.
I don't have your address or anything, so I can't stop by without getting a call back from you. And my cell phone is 737-4731. Again, it's Teresa, 920-737-4731. Thank you.
A haunting message of a young woman's last moments. Avery's attorneys say Stephen was simply trying to help his sister complete a sale. Prosecutors say Stephen was trying to lure Teresa Halbach onto the property using his sister's name. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
So what does this mean for the case? NBC 26 legal analyst Avi Burke says the tape is a very important piece of evidence for the prosecution.
Because the jury for the first time heard Teresa Halbach's voice. I think that would create a tremendous bond, a tremendous sympathy with the jury. The second thing is that it confirmed that Teresa intended to go to the Avery property to take photographs of the van that day.
This is the first time the jury has heard Teresa Halbach's voice.
Well, most of today's testimony includes some accusations of dirty police work.
Both sides question a sheriff's deputy accused of planting evidence he says he didn't do anything wrong. Jesse Wells continues our live team coverage from Chilton.
Well, the defense says James Link had motive and opportunity to plant blood inside Teresa Halbach's SUV. They called his work sloppy at best, illegal at worst. Several days spent scouring the Avery salvage lot in November of 2005 looking for any clues into the death of Teresa Halbach led James Link to discover several critical pieces of evidence, including the key to Teresa Halbach's RAV4 inside Avery's bedroom. Link still doesn't think he did anything wrong.
Would it have been fairer to Stephen Avery if someone other than a person who had been deposed in his lawsuit had done that search?
No, sir, I don't think it would have been.
Strang argues Link never should have stepped foot inside Avery's trailer or in its garage because he'd been involved in Avery's wrongful conviction lawsuit, something the defense says Link kept secret.
In effect, you took the decision upon yourself that this was information they didn't need to have.
Strang says Link may have known about this blood vial, blood they say Link could have planted on Halbach's dashboard.
I didn't do that. It's ridiculous.
Yet despite his central role investigating the Avery property, Link took very few notes, something the defense says makes it easier for him to change or deny his story.
Have you ever been involved in an investigation before in which it was decided beforehand that you would not write reports about what you were doing?
No, sir.
The defense also noted Link never signed into the Avery auto salvage property on November 5th, 2005. He said he arrived around 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night. The defense says he could have arrived earlier and possibly planted that blood. Dassey, NBC 26, Chilton.
Another deputy involved in the 2005 search of the Avery salvage lot testified this afternoon. Dave Remaker says he didn't see anyone plant evidence or tamper with Halbach's SUV.
Nobody entered that vehicle or did anything to that vehicle other than watch it.
So far, the defense hasn't accused Remaker of any wrongdoing.
So what do you think? Well, conflict of interest in the Stephen Avery trial.
Tonight, a juror admits she recognized one of the key witnesses.
But the judge refuses to dismiss the juror. Jesse Wells begins our live team coverage in Chilton with what this means for the case.
Well, the judge in the case said he wanted to be very careful about dismissing any potential jurors. Even if that juror had been kicked off the case would have continued on as scheduled. Now, the defense argued in court the juror can't give Avery a fair trial. In the end, the judge disagreed. As this room shows, Stephen Avery's trial is a daily spectacle for media all over the state. Judge Patrick Willis worries the constant media spotlight may bias jurors, and he doesn't want to kick jurors off the case without good cause.
The court does not feel at this point, being less than halfway through the trial, that we have so many extra jurors that we can easily dispose of them.
The dispute today centers around Detective Dave Remaker. Online court records showed in 1999 Remaker was awarded $100,000 for being injured in a car crash. One of the jurors in that case now sits on the jury for Stephen Avery. The juror only recognized Remaker after he took the stand. Remaker told the jury he never saw anyone plant evidence inside Teresa Halbach's SUV during his time on the Avery salvage lot in November of 2005.
There is not the reasonable appearance of impartiality and fairness. That just simply doesn't look fair.
Behind closed doors, the judge questioned the juror one-on-one. The juror said she didn't recall much about the previous case and didn't think it would bias her judgment of whether Avery killed Teresa Halbach.
So the court is going to deny the motion to strike this juror for cause.
That means all 16 jurors will continue hearing testimony and eventually decide if Stephen Avery is guilty or innocent of murder. Now, the judge will tell the juror to disregard her previous experience with Detective Remaker when deciding her verdict in this case. Both sides actually praised the juror for her honesty. She volunteered the information once she realized she recognized the detective. Jesse Wells, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Well, NBC 26 legal analyst Avery Burke says the case has gone too far now, and after hearing the questioning, the judge trusts the juror.
I think under these circumstances, the judge's decision could have gone either way. I think this judge was probably disinclined to remove her because he doesn't want to risk a mistrial.
Now, after court today, all of the attorneys commended the juror.
They say they're glad she brought the issue to the judge's attention. Aaron Keller continues our live team coverage inside the courthouse.
That's exactly right, Bob and Stacy. Attorneys on both sides say this juror did the right thing, but still Stephen Avery's defense attorneys have some concerns about how this juror will view Detective Dave Remaker after giving him that $100,000 in another case.
It's more the role that she was pressed into playing as a citizen, as a juror in one case, now as a juror in the second.
I felt it was probably necessary
to just get it out on the record and move on past that.
The answers given certainly wouldn't disqualify this person automatically from serving on this juror. This juror, we've noted, has been particularly attentive.
Attorneys on both sides say it's important to note that the jury in this case is taking their duty very seriously. The juror in this particular incident notified the judge almost immediately of the potential conflict. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Aaron. Now, attorneys also heard some unusual testimony from a Calumet County Sheriff's deputy. Dan Kuharski collected evidence from Avery's property. Now, he defended his fellow officers accused in a setup, saying it's just as likely aliens planted the evidence.
And is that in the sense of anything's possible?
That's in the sense of it's possible aliens put it there, I guess.
There weren't any aliens in the room, right?
Not that I know of.
So you're...
Now, he was inside Avery's trailer when deputies found Hallbuck's car key and also claims it could not have been planted.
So what do you think?
Avery trial, the very first time Teresa Hallbuck's sister speaks about the case.
Katie Hallbuck testified this afternoon for only about a half hour, but she provides a key observation to the case against Avery. Aaron Keller begins our live team coverage outside the courthouse in Chilton.
Katie Hallbuck testified here in court about the type of jeans Teresa liked to wear, the same type that turned up in Stephen Avery's burn pit.
Taking the stand, Katie Hallbuck talked about happy memories and of something sisters often share, shopping.
Well, she had a lot of weather-made jeans just because she really liked the jeans.
But those memories of happy times may now play an important role in this murder trial.
One day she showed me a new pair of jeans she had, and I noticed that the brand was Dassey Fuentes, and I knew that Dassey Fuentes was an older person, so I told Teresa that she has old person jeans.
A Dassey Fuentes button turned up in Stephen Avery's burn pit. Here it is, magnified and still covered in ash. Prosecutors say Hallbuck's bones were found burned as well. After court, defense attorney Jerry Buting wouldn't comment about how the button wound up in Avery's burn pit.
We don't think that evidence is that compelling anyway.
Katie Hallbuck also showed the jury a blue lanyard attached to her sister Teresa's keychain. Katie gave Teresa that blue lanyard. It was with Hallbuck's car key when investigators testified to finding it in Avery's bedroom.
In the end, the bone evidence from the burn pit will probably be much more compelling to this case than the button, but as a prosecutor, you don't want to hold anything back, and Stephen Avery's attorneys, as you heard, are not challenging the button. Aaron Keller, NBC 26, live in Chilton.
Thanks, Aaron.
Today, one of the jurors is dismissed from the case due to a death in the family. Both sides agreed to the dismissal without any argument. The juror has to travel to another state and would have missed several days of testimony.
The juror could not reasonably be expected to come back with even a one-day absence for postponing the trial.
So now the jury consists of 15 people. Only if the jury dips below 12 people would a mistrial be inevitable.
So,
Aaron Davison has this night off. The DNA expert who helped free Stephen Avery from prison in 2003 gave testimony today that might possibly send him back. And the sister of Teresa Hallbuck connected her murdered sister with evidence found in a burn pit near Stephen Avery's home. CBS 5's Chris Schuler joins us now live from Chilton with more. Chris.
Tom, a day of extremes down here in Chilton. Evidence presented both scientifically and emotionally. Defense lawyers have called it the magic bullet recovered in Stephen Avery's garage. According to forensic scientist Sherry Culhane, Teresa Hallbuck's DNA was on it.
The profile from the bullet is consistent with all of the types from Teresa Hallbuck.
And Stephen Avery's was on Hallbuck's car key.
The types were consistent with Stephen Avery.
In all, Culhane testified 180 items were tested for DNA at the state crime lab. She matched blood in this SUV to both Avery and Hallbuck and linked bone fragments from this burn pit again to the victim.
It appeared to be subjected to intense heat.
But one thing heat didn't destroy was this rivet from a brand of jeans Hallbuck's younger sister Katie testified her sister owned.
Well, one day she showed me a new pair of jeans she had, and I noticed that the brand was Dassey Fuentes.
Prosecutors called the 15-year-old in part to connect this rivet to Teresa Hallbuck. Investigators say after killing Hallbuck, Avery burned her body in this burn area behind his garage.
And after you learned that your sister had had died. When you looked through her stuff, Katie, did you find her Daisy Fuentes jeans?
We did not.
Now, Tom, back to that DNA testing. Culhane testified today in court that a mistake was made while she was doing testing on that bullet. Somehow her own DNA ended up in the sample, but she says it doesn't affect the final outcome. She says she was training some other analysts at the lab at the time when it happened. But come Monday, the defense is sure to raise questions about this when she gets back up on the stand for cross.
All right, thank you, Chris. Chris Schuler live in Chilton this evening.
CBS 5 News Weekend, working for you.
Welcome back, everyone. The second week of testimony in the trial of Stephen Avery focused on physical evidence, who found it and how and when it was collected. Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey are accused of murdering Teresa Holbach on Halloween of 2005 and then burning her body. Avery was convicted of rape in 1985 and exonerated in 2003 by DNA evidence. Dassey also faces a sexual assault charge, though. A charge filed against Avery was dropped before trial started due to a lack of physical evidence. Now, forensic scientist John Ertl from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab started testimony this week. Ertl looked through burn barrels in Stephen Avery's burn pit. Ertl said he also tested the floor in Avery's garage. The prosecution believes Avery shot Holbach in that garage. Avery's attorney, Jerome Buting, pointed out that mistakes may have been made. Now, Calumet County Sheriff Sergeant Bill Tyson testified that the Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies involved in the initial investigation all acted professionally at the crime scene at all times.
By the way, the three of you didn't plant any blood while you were doing that, did you?
No.
On Tuesday, Avery's defense grilled Sergeant Tyson. Tyson said he was ordered to supervise Manitowoc County Sheriff's Sergeant Andy Colborn, Lieutenant Jim Link, and Detective Dave Remaker as they searched Avery's trailer.
That, of all places, you knew was important that you make sure that these Manitowoc officers not be alone.
Correct.
And so you kept an eye on them, didn't you?
I was watching what they were doing, yes.
Had you ever, in any of your years as an officer, had to watch the officers who were searching where you were to make sure that they weren't alone?
No.
Items seized that night: handcuffs, leg irons, and a notebook listing Holbach's cell phone number. Jerome Buting focused on what wasn't found, though: the key to Holbach's car.
And would you agree with me that it would have been very difficult for Lieutenant Link or Sergeant Colburn to have planted a Toyota key in that residence under your watch?
I believe it would have been difficult.
Right, our legal analyst Rob Bellin joins us now. And Rob, they're talking about evidence the first couple days of the trial.
There's actually some real bizarre circumstances here. Like you heard, this is the first time that Mr. Tyson ever had to watch other officers do their job. So that sort of supports the fact that, even Calumet County may have seen there could be some problems with Manitowoc. However, they counter that with Tyson saying, I did watch them. I'm an unbiased, investigator here, and there's no way that they could have done anything on my watch.
All right, that was a theme that came up quite often. Now, later in the day, Manitowoc County Sergeant Andy Colborn and Lieutenant Jim Link, they took the witness stand. They said the claim by the defense that they planted evidence over a lawsuit filed by Avery for his wrongful rape conviction was ridiculous. An immediate.
Have you ever planted any evidence against Mr. Avery?
That's ridiculous. No, I have not. I have to say that this is the first time my integrity has ever been questioned.
Now, Stephen Avery's attorney, Dean Strang, didn't ask Colburn one question about planting evidence, specifically the blood vial. The state asked the court to tell the jury to disregard any references to it.
You heard all the questioning about the vial of blood in the clerk's office in jury selection. You heard the contamination in press releases. You heard the contamination in opening statements. Now, for the first time, when evidence should be placed into the record, or at least placed into this particular case, we hear nothing.
I'm idealistic. I'm certainly naive at times, but I am not so naive to think that someone who may have planted blood evidence, who may have been involved in planting a key, would come into this courtroom and simply because asked under oath, did you do it, say, oh yes, I did. We are not going to have a Perry Mason moment here.
All right, Rob, let's talk about that because, you know, the vial of blood came up all the time. He didn't ask one officer in the center of that anything about it.
Well, I think, you know, Ken Kratz is doing his job, but I have to agree with Dean Strang here. I mean, if anyone thinks that Link or Colburn are going to get on the stand and say that, yeah, we planted evidence against Mr. Avery, that's ridiculous. Of course they're not going to say that. So in some ways, cross-examining on that, it may be a waste of time. And they did answer the question on direct. So at this point, it's way too premature. The defense still hasn't even gotten to their case, and let the defense put on their evidence and then see what they come up with.
All right, but as we find out, the very next day on Wednesday, Lieutenant Link defended himself against allegations that he planted Avery's blood in Teresa Holbach's SUV. Avery's attorneys say Link, an evidence custodian for the department, knew the blood was there and could have planted it. Link said he found out the vial of blood was sitting in the clerk's office last December.
Did you ever plant it anywhere in Teresa Holbach's vehicle or anywhere where it could be found as part of this investigation?
No, sir, definitely not.
Lieutenant Link also testified about finding Teresa Holbach's car key on the 7th search of Avery's bedroom.
I informed the other two officers that there's a key laying on the floor, and it was not there before. They all looked at it. At that point, Deputy Kucharski photographed it and subsequently collected it.
Lieutenant Link, let me just ask you, were you surprised to see that key?
Yes, sir, I was.
Why?
It wasn't there before.
After the collection of the key, did you, Deputy Kucharski, and Sergeant Colburn attempt to ascertain where the key had come from or do some further investigation?
Yes, we did.
Tell the jury what kind of investigation you did, please.
We looked at the cabinet, at the back corner of the cabinet. We saw that there was an opening between the back of the cabinet and the side, approximately 1/2 to 1 inch, and we believed that that's where the key had fallen from the cabinet.
Do you suppose that if a defense lawyer stood up and asked you, did you plant blood in Teresa Holbach's car, do you suppose you'd tell me?
Yes, sir.
You think
I
you
did
would?
not.
All right, who do you think won here? We have the two main players, the two cops who allegedly planted the evidence.
Well, I think it depends what you're looking at. You've got a couple issues. Ken Kratz is going to try to strike this theory of defense instruction, but that's way too premature. Then really one thing that stands out is this car key. I don't think we've heard an adequate explanation how it's on the 6th or 7th search. They come in, there's a picture of this key on the ground next to these slippers, and no one saw that at any time earlier. And the only explanation we have so far is that there was a cabinet nearby and they think it fell out of the cabinet. Why didn't someone hear it or see it fall when they were moving the cabinet or searching the cabinet? And why haven't we seen the actual cabinet as to how this even could have happened? So what strikes me is that it seems to be very bizarre how that key just sort of magically appeared.
Most murder trials are fairly bizarre, though, aren't they?
Well, that's true. You never know what's going to come up at a trial. That's true.
All right, thanks, Rob. Hey, we'll have more on Wednesday's testimony, and we're going to hear a voicemail left by Holbach on the day that she went missing. That's later on. And welcome back, everybody, as we look back at the past week in the Stephen Avery murder trial. Manitowoc County Detective Dave Remaker also testified on Wednesday. Now, he said that Lieutenant Link assigned him to head up the Manitowoc County end of the investigation into Teresa Holbach's disappearance. Remaker said he and Lieutenant Link interviewed Avery at his home the morning after Holbach was reported missing.
I think my comments were, I think Calumet County is barking up the wrong tree. I think we both were in agreement at the time that Steve had nothing to do with it. That was just our feeling.
Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He was a prosecution witness at the time.
Well, it's obvious that Ken Kratz is trying to use that testimony to combat this tunnel vision theory that the defense is trying to put forward.
Right.
So they're saying, you know, that this, there's no way that they just honed in on Stephen Avery. Not only did they maybe think someone else was involved, they didn't even think Mr. Avery was involved. So that's obviously to combat that part of the defense, and it depends. If the jury finds Detective Remaker to be credible, then that's good evidence for the state.
All right, good insight. Hey, on the second day of the search, Remaker said he found a voice message from Teresa Holbach on Barb Yanda's home machine. Remaker said the message was left On Halloween before noon, Stephen Avery called Auto Trader magazine that morning using the name B. Yonda to request Halbach so she could photograph the van his sister was selling.
Hello, this is Teresa with Auto Trader magazine. I'm the photographer, and I'm just giving a call to let you know that I could come out there today in the afternoon. It would probably be around 2 o'clock or even a little later. If you could please give me a call back and let me know if that'll work for you, because I don't have your address or anything.
Now, Ken Kratz defended playing that voicemail because he said it was helping set up the whole timeline for things. What do you think about that?
I think it's undisputed that Teresa Halbach was there at that property. So in a way, this could be considered cumulative evidence, and they don't even need it. But, you know, Ken Kratz done a good job. He got it in, and now he can make his argument that these people are hearing from Teresa Halbach, like he said in his opening, that, you know, Teresa Halbach's going to tell you who did this. You're going to hear from her, and he set that up well.
An emotional tug as well.
Absolutely emotional.
All right. On Thursday, Calumet County Deputy Dan Koharski told jurors about seeing Sergeant Colburn and Lieutenant Link the day Teresa Halbach's RAV4 key was found in Stephen Avery's bedroom. Now, the defense says Colburn and Link planted that key. Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz asked Koharski whether the key could have been planted.
Yes, I guess it is possible.
And is that in the sense of anything's possible?
That's in the sense of it's possible aliens put it there, I guess.
You were not watching Link and Colburn to be sure that they did not plant evidence, right?
That's correct.
Back to that key, he said it could have been possible.
And I think that's actually some typical police speak, because that's how sometimes the police come off at a trial to say, yeah, it's possible, but you know that it's so far remote. But I think that this actually helps the defense, because I think that looks somewhat unprofessional on behalf of the police officer, and they've already established that someone should be watching these Manitowoc officers. Now there's Mr. Koharski, and he's not watching. That's a perfect, plays right into the defense's argument.
All right. The state arson investigator also took the stand. Special Agent Kevin Heimroll examined remnants in Avery's burn pit and found evidence believed to be linked to Stephen Avery and Teresa Halbach. A rivet from a pair of blue jeans.
Was this clothing rivet that was identified, easily identified, or at least identified with writing right on the rivet?
Yes.
And what does the rivet say?
The rivet is stamped Dassey Fuentes.
Now, I understand you kind of have a problem with the rivet because they only found one rivet.
And something else, you know, you'd wonder why one rivet survived, but there wasn't a button or any other rivets. Absolutely. However, this is still some pretty good testimony for the state. You know, it's like the icing on the cake, showing, you know, that Teresa Halbach may have been there, and then, of course, bringing on Teresa's sister to testify about those jeans.
All right. After the break, you were talking about the sister. We're going to hear more about that rivet from Teresa Halbach's sister. On the final day of week 2, the sister of Teresa Halbach connected her murdered sister with evidence found in a burn pit near Avery's home. Teresa's 15-year-old sister, Katie Halbach, said she remembered teasing Teresa after she showed her a pair of Dassey Fuentes jeans that she'd bought. Investigators found rivets, as we said earlier, from that brand of jeans in the burn pit on Avery's property, where Halbach's bone fragments were also found. She also told jurors she got a blue lanyard at EAA 2 years ago and gave it to Teresa as a gift. The fob with Teresa's car key found in Stephen Avery's trailer a few days after her disappearance. Also on Friday, a juror was dismissed due to a death in the family, leaving now 15 jurors. And Dean Strang renewed a motion to suppress all of the evidence seized from Stephen Avery's trailer, garage, burn pit, and burn barrels. Now, Strang's motion was denied last year. He says law enforcement violated the one warrant, one search principle. Strang says Avery's burn pit should have been searched that first night. Now, Judge Willis will rule on this motion at a later date. Following those arguments, Teresa Halbach's 15-year-old sister, Katie, took the stand and talked about that rivet that we spoke of earlier.
How do you know that she had a pair of Dassey Fuentes jeans?
Well, one day she showed me a new pair of jeans she had, and I noticed that the brand was Dassey Fuentes, and I knew that Daisy Fuentes was an older person, so I told Teresa that she has old person genes.
You showed us the rivets. What's, what do you close the waist with on these jeans?
A button.
Does that kind of look like more or less like the rivets, except a little bit bigger?
Yeah.
A tug at the heartstrings there with Katie. But also, let's talk about this motion that they are renewing once again.
Actually, I think that motion is very important. It was denied. The motion had been made back in June, and now they're making some serious allegations that police officers have some inconsistent testimony, giving me a basis to renew the motion. But in Wisconsin, there has never been a case on point on this one search, one warrant principle. So I think if there is a conviction in this case, you're probably going to be seeing some new law made from our Supreme Court on that issue.
All right. Hey, the DNA analyst whose work freed Stephen Avery from prison testified. She presented damning evidence against Stephen Avery. Sherry Culhane told the jury that 6 bloodstains in Teresa Halbach's SUV contained Stephen Avery's DNA profile, and Halbach's RAV4 key contained Avery's DNA. Culhane said Avery's DNA profile occurs once in every 4 quintillion people. Culhane said a bullet fragment from Avery's garage had Halbach's DNA on it.
Were there any other profiles developed on the bullet besides Teresa Halbach's?
No.
Was Teresa Halbach's profile the only profile that you found on that bullet?
Yes.
Were there any mixtures?
No.
Now, Culhane testified that her DNA got into a sample used to monitor that testing process for contamination.
I felt as if I was far enough away from my workbench not to introduce my DNA, but apparently I was incorrect.
Now, your DNA did not come up on the bullet, did it?
No.
Obviously, though, I mean, this is a big break for the defense to jump on.
This is a huge break for the defense. I even have cases where I've had lab analysts' DNA show up in a sample, and you start to question the whole process. So the state's going to say that this, didn't actually affect any of this process here, but I think, you can expect that the defense is going to jump all over this and question the whole process. And how hard is it to argue to a jury, this analyst has been doing this for 23 years, why doesn't she watch CSI and decide to, wear a mask?
I know, when I heard that, I was going, ooh, all right. For extended coverage, everybody, including courtroom journals from myself and Anjanette Levy, just go to our website, WFRV.com/Avery.